Hello, I'm Washington Examiner education reporter Jeremiah Poff. I'm here today with Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ryan Walters. Ryan, thanks for being here with me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Excited to talk about what we're doing in Oklahoma. We're leading on education reform. We're playing offense. So I'd love to tell the story of what's going on back home.
Yeah, absolutely. You have made a lot of headlines nationally for a number of things that you've done, but I want to kind of start with a general question here. What do you think a conservative vision of education is?
I think a conservative vision of education, it starts with some key principles. Those key principles are, number one, that God gave kids to parents, not government. Everything needs to be centered around a family-focused vision, one that includes parents every step of the way. That's school choice, that's parents' rights, that's transparency. The other core principle is that every child can learn, and we want to give students a high bar, high expectations. The reality is what you've seen from the left is this victim mentality, this mentality that some kids can't learn, depending on your background, depending on where you come from. We're going to kind of create this victim class, very Marxist in nature. And so what they've done is created this environment in schools where we don't have high achievement, we have excuses for failure. And then lastly, it's the belief that we've got to get interest groups like the teachers union, like the radicals in the Federal Department of Education who continue to push ideology on our kids, continue to use our kids like a social experiment out. So when you empower parents, when you set a high bar of expectations and you think outside the box in order to get there, that means free market solutions. And lastly, when you challenge the actors that have so held back progress, like the teachers union, the federal government, and the Biden administration in particular, you're going to create an environment for success. And I believe that you're going to see this in schools across our state, and I see this going on in other red states. So I'm very excited about the future there.
So we've seen a lot of Republican-controlled states enact school choice over the last year. Your own state, I think, passed a tax credit scholarship program. But another thing that you did around the same time was establish this Catholic virtual charter school, and that seems to have made some waves. Do you think that I think it's St. Isidore's, right? How is that project going? And do you anticipate more similar type projects coming down the line?
Right, and when you talk about school choice, that is private school choice. It's the ability for a parent to choose a private Christian school, a home school. It's also charter schools. And we are happy and thrilled to lead the country in providing the first religious charter school in the country. And again, it's a Catholic charter school. We have seen the Catholics do a tremendous job with their private schools. They've now given us an application for running a charter school, and we believe it's absolutely a protection of, first of all, their religious liberties. Mm-hmm. To say that anyone can start a charter school except for a religious institution is clearly a violation of their religious liberties, number one. But number two, it's more options for kids. It's more of an opportunity for kids across the state to be able to choose an environment that best meets their needs. We're leading in this front. Other states, we've got to continue how do you take school choice to the next level? How do you continue to give more and more opportunities for parents? And I believe it's crucial.
One of the main criticisms of this, though, is that you're basically funding the state is funding a religious institution. And I think there's been some legal challenges already to it. Sure. How is that playing out, and what do you say to those people who say that the government shouldn't be funding a religious school?
So what I would say is there's a fundamental misunderstanding here about some of our founding principles. When we're talking about education, we have a lot of folks that we've got to get more educated on the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. There is no separation of church and state listed in the Constitution. What we've seen is the Supreme Court in the 1960s aggressively take on prayer in school, any kind of religious liberties in the school setting. And what we've seen is now the public school system really create atheism as a state-sponsored religion. We don't want any mention of God. We don't want any mention of Christianity. The reality is what we want to do is protect religious liberties, allow religious institutions to start a charter. Look, there is an application process. There are things they have to show the state to show what they're doing in their classroom to be exceptional. Hey, they've met all those standards. So why in the world would we tell a religious institution that's been so successful, you can't do this, when we're going to allow other actors to do it? I think, Oklahomans' parents have demanded more options. They love the idea of more charter schools. They love the idea of a religious charter school. So, our parents are excited about it, and I think we've got to continue listening to parents. We've got to continue providing them more options, more choices. And we've got to continue to take on, look, the teachers union, they lose their mind every time that you open up a new school choice program. They lose their mind every time that there's going to be less union membership to pad their pocketbooks there with their union dues. And of course, the Biden administration is fighting this every step of the way. There's turmoil every day in the Biden administration based on the way they're dealing with education. But the reality is parents have woken up. Red states are going to lead on this. Oklahoma is leading. We're the tip of the spear on this. We're going to continue to be aggressive and play offense for our kids.
Doesn't this kind of get to a very fundamental question about what an education is supposed to be about, though? And what do you see, you mentioned the teachers unions repeatedly. What do you think they think is the purpose of an education? And what do you, as the superintendent of Oklahoma, think is the purpose of an education?
Yeah, I think that we've allowed teachers unions to control the system for so long. They view it as a way to collect money and a way to accumulate power. That's some of their basic instincts here. But then it goes even deeper than that. They view education as a way to create Democrat voters. They view it as a way to create an ideology early on in kids. You look at the positions they've taken, and they're absurd. Talking about radical gender theory with first and second graders. Talking about telling kids that they're racist because of the color of their skin in grade school. These are absurd positions until you see what their end goal is. Their end goal is to promote their ideology in order to win elections, in order to circumvent the entire American traditions, undermine those traditions, undermine the American society as we see it. They talk about it. They want to undermine the family. They want to undermine our faith. That's why they hate the idea of a religious charter school. They hate school choice. And so what you've seen here is teachers unions that have continued to be motivated by money, power, and then their ideology. And this is where continuing to push them out of the education system, using a free market approach. I mean, in Oklahoma, hey, if you're a great teacher, we offer performance pay. You can make up to 6 figures and stay in the classroom. We're offering teacher bonuses that are the largest in the country for high-performing teachers. We're going to continue to use free market incentives to create an education system that works best for parents and attracts the best teachers to the school system. And again, we play offense. So the teachers union's on the run here, and we're putting them in the position where they got to explain these crazy policies they have and why every time their policies are enacted, our education system gets more expensive, but the outcomes continue to get worse.
So shifting gears for a minute, you're here in Washington, D.C. to testify before the House Education Committee on the influence of Chinese Confucius institutes in K-12 schools. You've kind of been in a little bit of a battle with Tulsa Public Schools for a number of reasons, but this is one of the topics that you guys have kind of clashed over. Tell me a little bit about what's going on there and what you're planning to tell Congress tomorrow.
So, Tulsa Public Schools was one of our worst performing schools in the state of Oklahoma. It was our largest school district. We had a far left liberal running the school. She continued to create low expectations on kids, so they were low performing, and she continued to engage in activities like critical race theory. They were one of the first districts that we found violating our ban on that. They were also the only district in the state that took money from the Chinese Communist Party to create these Confucius institutes in their school. And what we found through research and through our team digging in is that these entities were formed. We have the Chinese Communist Party spokesperson back in 2010 saying, we are creating Confucius institutes for, quote, propagandizing our ideology into other countries. I mean, they have literally stated that as their mission. We've seen higher ed, the Trump administration rid higher ed of these Confucius institutes. If you go to some college campuses, you'll see some of the old Confucius buildings that are now empty because the Trump administration really throttled these back as China became more and more adversarial. But what we saw in Tulsa was our biggest district decided to go through affiliated nonprofits and still accept money from the Chinese Communist Party to continue these programs. So we are going to put an end to that. I'm going to be testifying to Congress tomorrow that I believe that we should have legislation for every state that says you don't take money from adversarial foreign governments, and create and ensure that there's transparency around these nonprofits that are funneling communist money into our schools. So I'll be testifying about that, and I want to make sure that this is a national security threat. Anytime that you have your adversary who continues, we've got states that have banned them buying, property and things like that in their states. We're seeing Congress continue to recognize the threat that they pose. We have to take this seriously, and we have to ensure that they're not undermining our entire education system.
And again, that kind of gets back to what are schools teaching. And recently you just approved PragerU kids, or I think is what the program is, to be used in Oklahoma schools. What have you seen has been the reception from that one? And then kind of more more broadly, what kind of curriculum should public schools in general in Oklahoma be promoting, and how does the PragerU program contribute to that?
We were excited to be, the first state in the country to really have this incredibly expansive PragerU coming into our schools to allow their curriculum for every school in the state, every teacher, and every parent. I love that about the curriculum too, is it's available for every parent. You can see every aspect of what PragerU does in the classroom, the curriculum, what the teachers are talking about, and everything else. But what we view as so important is you have to have an education system that, first of all, is grounded in truth. You've seen the left, the radical left, take this on by, pushing the pronoun issues, pushing that you can change your gender, pushing that there's 27 genders. That's not true. When you say that to kids and you push things on kids that aren't true, you fundamentally, intellectually undermine any kind of academic effort. So it's got to be grounded in truth. You've seen this attack on our history as well. Our history is our history. We were endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's what Jefferson wrote in the Declaration. Well, what does that mean? We have to have an understanding of what our founders viewed for this country. And I truly believe in our history courses, as a former history teacher, what you do is you teach those core principles. You really lay into what was America, what was the Declaration, how was it institutionalized in the Constitution, right? And then you judge history according and through that lens. You look at these moments in history and you see a nation that led the free world because of those principles. That also means you acknowledge the times that we didn't live up to those principles and you call back to that. But it is a constant reminder and a call to kids, to students, to say, this is this great country that we've been so richly blessed to be in. It's up to you to continue its greatness. Failure to do that will absolutely lead to a decline, but we want the expectation to be that we continue to be the greatest country in the world. But it's an education system that's grounded in that belief, that we're here to create a citizenry that continues America being the leader of the free world. It's a belief that we're going to teach truth. When we teach math, reading, science, and history, it's grounded in truth. It's grounded in high expectations. It's grounded into the belief that every individual is capable of great things. It's also grounded in the belief that God created every individual uniquely. So that means you have to have an education system that is really centered around the student and understand that some students will take a path directly into college. Some students may not go directly into college. Some students may not go to college at all. They might go into workforce training. They might be more responsive to different types of learning. But this is why we have to continue to create an education system that recognizes every student as an individual and continues its grounding in truth.
You mentioned truth a lot there. One thing that, the founders of this country were very educated men. There's been some discussion among the right and conservatives about what the role of a kind of a classical liberal arts view of education is. Do you see room for public schools to kind of re-embrace the great books at all?
Absolutely. I think that's got to be the core of so much of what our education system is. We were very excited. I was there to open up. We have a Hillsdale affiliated classical charter school that just opened up in Tulsa. So coincidentally, while we've had frustrations there with the Tulsa Public School District, we also have a tremendous charter school that just opened up there. But that is so much of what we as conservatives need to be pushing in education. It is the great books. And it's amazing to me when you look at what the left is pushing, and this is why Democrats are just absolutely getting crushed on this right now. Education, their vision is off. It does not align with American values. They are obsessed with their idea of what they call diversity, equity, and inclusion. And inclusion to them means genderqueer, flamer, and the most outrageous sexual content needs to be made available to grade school kids, while at the same time fighting against books like the Bible, the Constitution, the great works being included and understood. But this is a fundamental disagreement here. You have the left that wants all of that sexual Marxism pushed on kids, and you have the right that says, listen, it's really clear. We know what has been true. We know what has stood the test of time. We know that these are classical works of literature that have stood for over 100 years, that people identify with, people think we're really culturally rich. And frankly, we live in a society today where it's like, hey, we should be absolutely holding up these great works that really help solidify human nature, They are great discussions. Again, I was a history teacher, but I love to go over the great works with them. I love to go in and read Hemingway. I love to go in and read Gadsby with kids and really do a deep dive. And let's talk through these characters. Let's work through this. I loved in world history going even further back to some of the classics when you look at Plato, when you start talking about government, you start talking about Thomas Aquinas. These are conversations we want our kids to have. We want them to have that type of an education system. And the right, I think we're spot on as conservatives to go, classical education is absolutely going to be a core building block of what education can look like in the future.
Ryan, thank you so much for your time. You can read more at washingtonexaminer.com. Thank you.